Privyet. Hello everyone. You're on the Slavic News Channel, and in this video, we'll discuss the most significant updates on the Russian-Ukrainian conflict. We have a lot of interesting updates, so let's begin. First, I would like to talk about the report of Commander-in-Chief of the Armored Forces of Ukraine. According to him, during the previous few days, the Ukrainians managed to establish additional control over cities and villages on the Kursk direction, and as for the 14th of August, the Ukrainians captured around 74 settlements. And a reminder that just 2 days ago, Sursky stated that the Ukrainians were controlling just 28 settlements, and as you can see, during the previous 2 days, the Ukrainians shown significant progress on the ground. Now let's talk about this progress on the ground, and first we're going to talk about the western direction. During the previous 24 to 48 hours, the Russians conducted a series of counter-offensives in the direction of Snagas, and basically, the Russians managed to restore control over the city. But the Ukrainians, when they were forced to fall back from this area, decided to move further in the northwestern direction, and now the Ukrainians are trying to storm and to attack the village of Krasnokhtyabrskaya. Furthermore, we can consider this Ukrainian maneuver as an attempt to cut the Russians in the southern part from the city of Kornivo. Now, the Russians suffer significant problems with logistics. If the situation remains the same, the Russians sooner or later will be forced to fall back from Snagas to Apanasovka. So this is the situation on this flank. Now let's move further. According to information we have, the Russians were forced to fall back from the village of Algavka towards Kornivo. The Ukrainians captured the village, and most likely, the Ukrainians captured the village a long time ago, but just now we have some changes according to different mappers. Most likely, the mappers made their updates according to this video. In this video, we can see a series of FPV drone attacks of Bobry FPV drone operators on Ukrainian positions. Once again, most likely, according to this video, this change of Algavka was made. As for the village of Kremenoy, this territory is under complete Russian control, but now it's very difficult to understand for how long the Russians are able to control this, being completely encircled from many directions. So maybe the Russians would be forced to fall back with the purpose to maintain the line of combat contact and to reduce the risk of being encircled in the very near future. Otherwise, the Russians need to make additional attempts to counterattack the Ukrainians in the village of Zuravli and the Ukrainians in the village of Algavka. If the Russians are able to restore control over these two villages, then they don't need to fall back from the city of Kremenoy. As for the breakthrough area between the cities and villages like Kochik, Alexievsky, Anastasievsky, Levchenko, and Krimskoy Byki, as you can see during the previous 12 hours, we haven't received anything regarding additional changes on the ground. According to different mappers, the Ukrainians managed to improve their positions deep inside of the territory of the Russian Federation, and according to the same sources, currently the edge Ukrainian positions of Sabotage and Reconnaissance Group are located somewhere between the villages of Lyubomirovka, Bolshaya Orlovka, Vishny Derevenki, Bezentsev, and Levchenko. And if we calculate the distance between possible Ukrainian positions further in the northern direction and the village of Algavka and the city of Algavka itself, or at least with the main supply road between Kursk itself and the RYLSK, the current distance is around less than 8.5 kilometers. So the Ukrainians are moving further in the northern direction without being afraid of being encircled by the Russians. So very rare situation. Now let's move to the central flank, to the central direction. The Ukrainian sources published the video of how they were bombing the Russian forces inside of the village by the name of Staraya Sorokina. This area used to be in contested zone, but now we have geolocation that confirms the Russian presence in the area, and we have adjusted the map back in Russian favor, so we have colored this territory back as the territory under complete Russian control. Now let's move further. We have reports that Ukrainians were forced to return back to redeploy the forces of 82nd Air Assault Brigade and the forces of 80th Air Assault Brigade to the line of combat contact due to significant losses, and due to the situation that these two brigades have already lost their combat capabilities as a result of clashes in Kursk area. These two brigades have been already replaced by other battalions and other brigades, and the Ukrainians continue offensive. Now let's move further. Let's talk about the northeastern flank of Sudza-Kursk direction. According to information we have, and according to different mappers, the Ukrainians control the territory between the village of Malaya Lokhnya, Kosinsa, Cherkaskaya Poreknaya, and so based on this report, we have adjusted the map and added this territory as a contested. So nobody has doubts that the Russians control Russkaya Porekhnaya. Now let's move to Sudza area. According to different mappers, currently the Russians were completely forced to fall back from Sudza and from the Sudza agglomeration, and currently the Ukrainians control Martinovka, Mykolaievka, the city of Mirny, and the city of Sudza completely. So there are no more Russians inside of this agglomeration. So basically, according to this report, on the 14th of August, the battle for Sudza has ended and the Russians were forced to abandon their positions completely. Very important statement, of course. We are waiting for additional reports from pro-Ukrainian sources and pro-Russian sources. Once again, the Russians were forced to fall back. And currently the Russians are holding their defense on the line between Agronom and Kalmykov. This area between this red line and Sudza agglomeration is in the gray zone. Now let's move to the south flank of Kursk direction. We have adjusted the map. We have a lot of changes on the ground, as you can see. And first of all, today we got some geolocations that confirms the Ukrainian breakthrough that took place yesterday. Yesterday, Ukrainians, as a result of fast lightning attack, managed to break through the Russian defense belt through the village of Plyakovo, then to the village of Spalina, then to Kapets, then to the village of Kamyshno, and then the Ukrainians entered Giri. The Ukrainians were using significant number of armored vehicles and personal carriers. The Ukrainians were trying to dig in deeper. But as I understand, and according to the most of the military experts, the Ukrainians were ambushed in this area and they lost everything they had. Those who managed to survive, of course, left the territory towards more reliable positions to the west. The Russian sources published the video of how they were clearing and moving through the village, how they were driving across the main streets with the Russian flag in the vicinity of Town Hall. So based on this video, we can make 100% sure conclusion that the Russians restore control over Giri. And now the Ukrainians' edge positions are located somewhere in the village of Kamyshno. We don't know for sure whether the Ukrainians control this part of the village or this part in the gray zone. But we have just one geolocation that was published by the Russian side. In this video, we can see how the Russians were bombing and attacking the Ukrainian forces inside of this village. And the most important point is that we can see significant number of Ukrainian stormtroopers, Ukrainian forces that have the main purpose to dig in deeper, which confirms complete control over the village, and that the Russians currently don't have chances to counterattack with the purpose to force the Ukrainians to fall back. So this is the edge Ukrainian positions in this direction. Furthermore, we have additional video of how the Ukrainian soldiers were moving in the village of Plyakova. Now, as you can see, the Ukrainians are moving very slow. They're not very fast. For example, in this episode, we can see a civilian who decided not to leave the village and to stay there. He was sitting in the vicinity of his own building and watching how the Ukrainians were moving. As you can see, the Ukrainians didn't attack him, so they just were moving further, also in their own direction. This video confirms complete control over Plyakova itself. Now, let's move further and talk about North Kharkiv direction. Because after the 8th day of Ukrainian offensive operation in the Kursk direction, the Russians decided to increase their activity in Kharkiv area. The Ukrainian sources published the video how they were repelling Russian attack, and the Russians were using significant number of vehicles, personnel carriers, and the infantry. The Russians were trying to break through the Ukrainian defense belt and to capture the village of Laboka completely to secure the area around the northern area of Lipsy. The Ukrainians were bombing and attacking the Russians all over the line of combat contact. Currently, we don't know for sure whether the Russians managed to improve their positions or not, but at least one geolocation was discovered exactly in this point of Russian attack. So summarizing everything, we can make a conclusion that the Russians were attacking and the main purpose was to get inside of Lipsy itself and to improve their positions further in the southern direction. So most likely today we're going to receive additional updates. But obviously, this is very interesting. Currently, the Russians are trying to check and trying to understand whether the front lines are stable from the Ukrainian side or having problems due to their offensive operation in the Kursk area. Now let's move further. As for the territory between Volchansk until Pokrovsk, we haven't received anything, as well as nothing from Pokrovsk's direction. Just a few videos of how the Russians were after withdrawing the Ukrainian forces who were moving on the road in the Pokrovsk agglomeration itself. So nothing special, just a regular military activity. Very interesting updates are coming from the South Donetsk direction during the previous days. The Russians conducted the full-scale offensive operation with the purpose to cut the main supply road T-524 completely and to take under control the road. We don't know for sure whether the Russian offensive finished with the success. But anyway, we have adjusted the map. We have added additional blocks on the complete Russian control. At least in the southern part, the Russians were trying to capture the stronghold that located to the east of Ugledar. The Ukrainians of 72nd Mechanized Brigade were repelling this attack. As you can see, once again, the Russians were using significant number of tanks, armored vehicles, personnel carriers, and infantry as well. So the Russians most likely were attacking this stronghold. Maybe the stronghold was captured by the Russians. The Russians made few attempts. First attempt was to attack this stronghold on the intersection of the roads. But we don't know for sure whether the Russians were successful or not. And the Russians were trying to bring additional armor vehicles and tanks inside of Konstantinivka itself. And maybe the Russians were trying to capture the farms to the south of the village. As for Kherson and Zaporizhzhia direction, the Ukrainian sources reported that the Russians decided to reduce their defense possibilities in this direction in favor of Kupiansk area, and the Russians redeployed brigades and regiments from this area towards Kursk with the purpose to stabilize the situation completely. And that's it for this update. Slavic News Channel condemn any violence in the world. Thanks for watching and please like and subscribe.